The dog who brought leaves and left with a man's heart. He thought it was just a stray until the dog brought him a clue. They whisper, like the one that began on the edge of summer in a forgotten town, where a scarred old soldier ran a dusty corner store and trusted no one, not even himself. Then came the dog, skin and bone, silent eyes, and in his mouth a single leaf, blood-specked. They called him the leaf dog, a stray, maybe broken, maybe worse. But every morning he returned, same time, same ritual. One leaf left at the old man's doorstep, then gone like fog. Most ignored him. Some feared him. Only one man couldn't stop watching, and what that man would uncover about the dog's past, about a military secret buried in the woods, and about himself, would crack open a war-hardened heart. If you think animals can't speak, you haven't heard the story of Sergeant Ash. Stay with us, because by the end, you'll understand why some dogs don't just save lives. They rebuild them. The sun didn't shine in red pine that day. It pressed, like a weight, like a sentence, like something that refused to let go. Heat rose from the asphalt in slow, rippling waves that distorted the world just enough to make a man feel unsteady on his feet. Cicadas screamed like broken radios in the trees, their sound a constant, high-pitched saw across the silence of the forgotten town. Inside Grant's goods, the old ceiling fan clacked its rhythm like a bone in a drum. Elwood Grant, 68 and shaped by war and widowhood, leaned against the counter, sweat already darkening the collar of his shirt. The old radio behind him played nothing. He preferred it that way. No music, no talk shows, no noise, just the occasional squeak of the fan and the low hum of his breath. Outside, the road shimmered. Not a soul moved. Not the teenagers who usually loitered at dusk, not the churchgoers from St. Michael's, not even the old men who talked politics under the awning at the diner. The heat had chased them all indoors. And then Elwood saw it. Across the street, just past the gas pump long out of service, something moved, a stagger, not a stride, a shape, a dog, he thought at first. No, a shadow with ribs. It limped into view slowly, a German shepherd, or what was left of one. Its coat clung to its bones like wet laundry, fur caked in dust and old blood, its gait dragging one leg as though it no longer belonged. But the strangest thing, what froze Elwood's hand mid-reach toward the ledger, wasn't the limp. It was what the dog carried in its mouth. A leaf, not a green one, not something blown in from the trees. It was an oak leaf, dark and torn, and it gleamed red. Elwood stared. The dog stared back. Its amber eyes, too sharp, too human-locked onto him through the dusty glass. No panting, no tail wag, just a long, deliberate meeting of gazes. For a second, something old and buried kicked in Elwood's chest. He stepped back. "What in God's name?" he whispered, almost to himself. The bell above the door jingled softly as he pushed it open. Heat slapped him in the face, thick and wet. The dog was now at the bottom step, too close. Elwood raised his voice. "Get, shoo! Get on out of here!" he barked, louder than he intended. The dog didn't flinch. It moved closer, just enough to gently set the leaf down on the top step, its mouth careful, like it knew not to damage it further. Then it backed up, 3 slow steps, and sat. Elwood's throat tightened. "Get!" he yelled again, stepping forward and clapping his hands hard. The sound echoed down the street like a shot. The dog lowered its ears but didn't run. Its gaze never left his. "You deaf or just stupid?" Elwood muttered. With a grunt, he swiped the leaf off the step with his boot, watching it tumble into the gutter like trash. Still, the dog remained seated. It looked at the leaf, then back at him. And that's when the chill came. Even in the heat, Elwood felt it something in that gaze. Not hunger, not desperation, intention. The dog turned slowly, limped back across the road, and disappeared behind the post office. He stood there for a moment, hand still raised like it had something left to do. Then he looked down at his boot. A faint smear of red remained where the leaf had touched the wood. It wasn't sap. It wasn't paint. Blood. And in the center, so small it might have been missed if the light hadn't shifted, a tiny paw print. That night, Elwood didn't sleep. He lay in the back room of the store, tucked in among shelves of canned beans, fly-paper strips swaying above him. A photograph of his wife, June, stared at him from the dusty shelf. She had been gone 7 years. Cancer, the kind that doesn't wait long. They used to argue about pets. She always wanted a dog. Elwood always said no. "It'd be cruel," he once told her, "bringing something into my silence." She never pushed, just smiled, said, "One day, El, one day something's gonna come looking for you, and you won't be able to send it away." He stared at the ceiling fan now. It clicked with every turn, like a metronome keeping time with the heart he sometimes wished would slow down. Outside, thunder grumbled far-off summer storm brewing, and for reasons he couldn't explain, Elwood thought of that leaf again. The first time might have been coincidence. The second time felt like habit. But by the third morning, it became a ritual. Each day, just past sunrise, the dog returned. Same path across the cracked asphalt, same limp, same measured approach to the edge of the wooden steps leading into Grant's goods, but never empty-mouthed. No. Always with a leaf, a different one each time, carefully chosen, carried gently, placed with near reverence on the same exact floorboard just left of the front mat. Then, always the same routine. 3 paces back, sit, watch. Elwood didn't know what unsettled him more, the discipline or the eyes, those damn amber eyes. They didn't beg, they didn't plead, they just waited, as if the dog was holding its breath and wouldn't exhale until Elwood did something that mattered. But he never opened the door, not for the first 5 days. He watched from behind the slats in the blinds, face lit by the pale wash of dawn, jaw clenched so tight it ached. He told himself he was being smart. Let the mutt get bored. Move on. Town was full of soft-hearted folks with sandwich crusts and good intentions. But each morning, the dog came back to him. Day 4, a sycamore leaf, broad and cracked. Day 5, a frond of pine, oddly fresh. Day 6, a crumpled maple leaf, golden at the edges, like it had held on to fall too long. By then, people started to notice. Nora Bell, of course, was the first. The woman had eyes like a hawk and the memory of an unpaid debt. She stood outside the diner with her cane and styrofoam coffee cup, watching as the dog limped back into view one humid morning. She didn't call out, didn't wave, just squinted into the heat, then muttered under her breath, "He's coming back to the same doorstep every day. That's not hunger, that's a message." At the gas station, teenagers began to whisper. "You seen that leaf dog? No collar, but he acts like a soldier or something. He only shows up at Grant's. Weird, right?" By the end of the week, someone had snapped a photo and posted it on the community board app. "Dog brings leaves to war vet's doorstep. Every day. What does it mean?" Elwood saw the post. Pretended he didn't. He told himself he didn't care. Didn't matter that the dog had a limp. Didn't matter that it stared at him like it recognized something in him Elwood had spent years burying. But he noticed things. He always had. Noticed how the dog's tail never wagged. Noticed the slight hitch in its sit, the way it braced its bad leg like an old Marine preparing for parade rest. Noticed the small circular scar high on the left foreleg, faint but unmistakable. And the way it sat, not slouched. Not sideways, but straight, aligned, centered, like it had been trained to wait and wait and wait. He tried to ignore the weight that settled in his chest every morning when he heard the soft scuff of paws on gravel outside. But some mornings, especially the quieter ones, it sounded like footsteps. That's when the dreams started again. Not the screaming kind. Worse. The silent ones. Where you wake up and don't know what year it is. Don't know if you're in a desert tent or the back room of your store. Where you reach for someone who isn't there. June's side of the bed cold. He'd stare at the ceiling until light filtered through the blinds. Then, always, he'd rise slowly, walk to the door, and peek through the edge. And there he'd be. The dog, sitting, waiting. One morning, day 9, maybe 10. Elwood cracked the door open, just enough to watch without being seen. The air smelled like honeysuckle and old tar. The dog turned its head slowly, saw him, and didn't move, just laid a dark red magnolia leaf down like an offering, like penance. Elwood didn't say a word, didn't pick it up, didn't kick it off the porch. He just stood there, one hand braced on the wood, breath tight. And then he closed the door. Not harsh, not angry, just uncertain. Later that day, when Nora stopped by for her 2 tins of anchovies and a reason to pester Elwood, she said softly, "He's not just bringing you leaves, El. He's bringing you time. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" Elwood didn't answer. Didn't have to. That night, long after dark, when the town settled into its porch lights and bug zappers and Sunday night reruns, he stepped outside. In one hand, a dented can of stew. In the other, an old dented tin bowl. He set them down beside the stoop. Didn't say a word. Just looked out into the darkness and waited. The next morning, the sky hung low and thick, like it hadn't yet decided whether to rain or suffocate. The air was syrupy, clinging to skin and thought alike. Elwood opened the front door to Grant's Goods with the usual grunt, the bell above jingling its hollow chime into the empty morning. The leaf was there again, number 11, if he was keeping track, which, of course, he wasn't. Today's was a blackened tulip poplar leaf, crisp at the edges, like it had died holding its breath. It lay just where it always did, angled slightly left of the welcome mat. A signature, a calling card. He stood over it for a moment, hands on hips, jaw clenched. He could still smell the faint hint of iron from the first leaf, the bloodied one. That ghost of metallic scent still lingered in his memory, sharper than the bite of bourbon, harder than the scent of war. Behind him, the bell jingled again. "Elwood Grant," came the voice, that voice, firm as worn leather and just as warm. Nora Bell entered the store like she owned it, which she didn't, but no one had the nerve to remind her. Her white hair was pulled back in a knot, her floral blouse half tucked, half flared, and her purse the size of a field medic's bag. She leaned on her cane like it was a companion, not a crutch. "You still pretending you don't see him?" she asked, without looking up, heading straight for aisle 2, where she rearranged cans of pinto beans that didn't need rearranging. Elwood sighed, loudly. "Don't start." "Start what?" she said, not missing a beat. "Stating the obvious?" He returned to the counter, leaned on it like a man trying not to admit he was tired. "I see him," he admitted. "Doesn't mean I got an obligation." Nora placed 2 cans in her basket with more force than necessary. "That dog's talking, El. You just ain't listening." He let the silence stretch before replying. "Dogs don't talk, Nora. They beg. They bark. They bite. That's it." She looked over her shoulder. "That one don't beg, and he sure as hell don't bark." Elwood turned away. "What do you want from me? Pet him? Let him in? Give him a job stocking shelves?" Nora didn't smile. She didn't joke. She just stood there, her expression suddenly softened, voice dropping. "Elwood, he's choosing you. Every morning, like it or not. That means something." He shook his head, but the way his hand curled tighter on the counter gave him away. Nora walked over, cane tapping a slow rhythm against the warped wood floor. She stopped just short of the register and dropped her voice again, this time almost a whisper. "I watched my Harold go to war and come back a stranger. He never talked about what he saw. But some mornings I'd find him on the porch, talking low to our old hound like he was the only soul that understood him. Said that dog never judged the way people did. Never asked him to explain things he didn't have the words for." She looked at him now directly. "Maybe that dog out there knows something about you that you don't remember how to say." Elwood swallowed. Hard. His throat felt dry despite the humidity. "Nora," he began, but she cut him off. "I ain't here to fix you, Elwood Grant," she said, softer now. "But I know grief when I see it. And I know silence. You've been drowning in it for years." "That dog? He's a lifeboat, whether you want to admit it or not." He looked down, jaw ticking. "I didn't ask for a lifeboat," he muttered. "Most people don't," she replied gently, gathering her things. "Doesn't mean you don't need one." She made her way to the door, and just before it swung open, she added without turning back, "You ever think maybe he's not the one who's lost?" The bell jingled, and she was gone. That night, Elwood sat alone in the back room, the hum of the refrigerator like a low growl behind him. The photo of June still sat on the shelf above the cot, dusty, untouched, just like everything else in his life. He stared at it. She would have liked the dog. That much he knew. She had a softness in her that war hadn't beaten out of her. And him? He'd spent most of their marriage trying not to fall apart under the weight of the things he refused to name. Elwood stood, crossed the floor, and opened the cabinet beneath the sink. From the back he pulled out an old dented can of beef stew. No label, just a guess. He grabbed a metal bowl and, without thinking much, scooped half in. Cold. He walked out onto the porch. The night was quiet, just the creak of crickets and the distant rumble of a storm that hadn't decided where to go. He set the bowl down carefully, exactly where the dog had placed the last leaf. Then he stepped back, folded his arms, waited. The dog never came that night, but the next morning the bowl was clean, and there was another leaf waiting. It was the rustle of gravel that drew Elwood's eyes that morning, not the usual quiet crunch of a stray passing through, but a sound with intention, like the steps of someone trying not to be noticed. He was halfway through restocking the cooler and backhands deep in lukewarm soda cans when the noise floated through the side window. Soft, measured, then stillness. He didn't hurry. Men like Elwood Grant don't hurry, not when they've spent most of their life knowing that hurrying only makes the noise louder. Instead, he rose slowly, wiping condensation onto the thigh of his worn jeans. His left knee cracked when he straightened. The right one had stopped complaining years ago. He figured it had just given up. He stepped to the side window and tilted the blind just enough to see out. There he was. The dog. Still, but not gone. The bowl sat empty now, the dented lip of it glinting faintly in the weak morning sun. The food, what little he'd left, was gone. But the dog hadn't walked away this time. He was still there, a few yards back from the stoop, seated in the same posture Elwood had seen once before, a kind of practiced waiting. The shepherd's body was taut but not tense, his back legs folded under neatly, chest upright, eyes forward, not begging, not challenging, just present, like a soldier waiting for orders. Elwood opened the door quietly. The screen door creaked anyway. The dog didn't move. Elwood took one step out, just enough for his boots to meet the top step. The air was dry. A storm had broken the heat 2 nights ago, and the town was still drying out. The ground smelled of clay and pine rot. The sky was bleached with early sun, nothing but bare brightness from horizon to treetop. "You waiting for an invitation?" Elwood muttered. The dog blinked. Once. That was all. Up close, now, closer than he'd ever let himself be. Elwood could finally see the details. The dog's fur was darker than he thought, a mix of sable and ash, mottled with dirt and scars. And there, just above the left shoulder, a small patch of fur had been shaved recently, the skin beneath discolored by what looked like an old healing puncture. A scar, but not the kind made by another animal. A needle, a microchip site. He felt it then, something old and sharp flickering in the base of his skull. Like a landmine thought, like a muscle memory. He stared harder. The way the dog sat, not casual, not stray-like, it was too square, too symmetrical. Elwood had seen that posture before years ago in the blistered sands of Fallujah and the dusty checkpoints outside Baghdad. Canine units, military-trained dogs assigned to teams like his, to patrols that always felt one moment away from never coming back. One of those dogs had saved his life once. Rafe, he thought the handler's name was. The dog had no name Elwood ever learned. He was just a shadow with teeth and instincts too fast for most men to follow. This dog, this one here, had the same stillness, the same way of not blinking unless it meant something. And then it came. The flash. Not light, not memory, something worse, something deeper. The dog's outline blurred just for a second, and in its place, sand, fire, blood. Elwood's breath caught in his throat. The stoop beneath him faded. He heard the pop, pop, pop of small arms fire, the scream of tires on dirt, the metallic rattle of a door being kicked open. And then a woman's voice, not shouting, soft, gentle. El, it's just the dog. June. Always June. He squeezed his eyes shut, swallowed hard. The present returned, slow and clunky. The screen door groaned behind him in the breeze. Somewhere across town, a lawnmower coughed to life. The dog was still sitting, still watching, still waiting. Elwood exhaled slowly. His palms were damp. He hadn't even realized they'd clenched. He looked again, really looked, and saw something else. The dog wasn't challenging him. He wasn't probing weakness. He was mirroring him. Same posture, same stiffness. 2 tired sentinels on different ends of the same war. Elwood lowered himself onto the top step, knees cracking like old wood. "You've seen it too, haven't you?" he murmured. The dog tilted his head, just a little. Not a trick. Not performance. Recognition. A pause. Then the dog rose slowly, limping more now than before, and approached the bowl. He sniffed it once, then looked up at Elwood. Not asking, just acknowledging. Elwood nodded. "I'll do better tomorrow." The dog turned, limped a few steps back, and laid down under the edge of the awning. Not close enough to touch, but not running either. For the first time in years, Elwood didn't feel like he was the only one keeping watch. By the end of that week, the pattern no longer felt strange. Each morning, Elwood Grant opened the creaky screen door of Grant's Goods. And, like some private ritual, only the two of them understood. There it was, a new leaf, always fresh, always placed just off-center on the porch. Sometimes a crimson maple, sometimes an oak curled at the edge like a smile. Once, it was a small yellow ginkgo leaf, delicate as tissue, fluttering in a breeze Elwood hadn't felt until he saw it move. He never spoke of the leaves, not to Nora, not even to himself. But he started leaving the food out earlier. No more cans sloshed into a bowl like an afterthought. Now it was beef stew warmed slightly on the stovetop, a little water mixed in for digestion, no salt. He remembered the rules from long ago. They hadn't faded, just buried under years of silence and dust. The dog still nameless in Elwood's mind, but somehow beginning to feel more like a presence than an inconvenience weighted longer each day. At first, he'd vanish the second the food was gone. But now, he stayed, sat, watched, always at attention, like he was still serving some unseen commander. Elwood wouldn't say he minded. But every morning before unlocking the shop's front door, he checked the threshold, not for intruders, not for deliveries, for the leaf. He tried not to think about what it meant. A dog bringing offerings wasn't exactly a headline. But these weren't random. He knew it. Leaves from trees not even near the store. Sometimes still damp with dew, sometimes folded like something had carried them in its mouth for miles. One morning, Elwood stood at the threshold and stared down at a deep green magnolia leaf, broad and smooth. And for reasons he didn't want to explore, he whispered, "You run out of colors yet, soldier?" He regretted the word the moment it left his mouth. But the dog sitting under the edge of the side awning perked an ear, as if recognizing it. Soldier. Elwood exhaled hard through his nose, turned away, and mumbled to himself. Damn fool talking to a dog. But that night, as he shut down the lights in the back room, he paused. His eyes landed on the old footlocker shoved behind a chair, one he hadn't touched since June passed. Dust covered the lid, and a single photo frame lay face down on top of it. He stared at it for a beat too long, then shook his head and muttered, "Still not your business." Outside, the dog didn't bark, didn't scratch, but he stayed, curled under the porch light's soft glow, his eyes fixed on the same stars Elwood used to chart in desert nights too long ago to count. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. A week passed, then another, and slowly, without permission, without ceremony, they fell into an uneasy rhythm. Elwood would make coffee, curse the morning stiffness in his knees, then unlock the door. There would be a leaf, always a new one. He'd grumble something about freeloaders, then leave the food out. The dog would eat, then stay, sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes longer. He never begged, never approached. He simply sat, always facing the door, as if waiting for Elwood to say something important he wasn't ready to say. And Elwood, for his part, began to notice things. how the dog's paws were always clean despite the muddy ditches lining the side road, how he avoided the passing trucks that rattled by at dusk, not with panic, but calculated distance, like someone who'd been trained to move when necessary, how he checked the perimeter, circling once after eating, always stopping at the same corner of the porch before lying down. This wasn't a stray. This was a ghost of something Elwood had known before. One evening, just as the sky turned the color of an old bruise, Nora passed by again. She slowed near the porch, basket in one hand, the other resting on her cane. Elwood sat in his usual spot wooden chair near the threshold, eyes squinting at the horizon like it owed him something. She nodded toward the dog. "He's still bringing you leaves?" He didn't look at her. "He ain't bringing them to me," he muttered. "He's just leaving them, that's all." She smiled softly. "Sure." A pause. "You give him a name yet?" "Nope." "You ever gonna?" "Nope." She chuckled. "You always were stubborn." He shifted in his seat. "You ever think he might be naming you?" That earned her a glance. She winked, tapped her cane once on the ground, and moved on. Later that night, Elwood did something he hadn't done in years. He left the screen door open. Just a crack. Not enough for the dog to come in, but enough for the air to carry the scent of something real, something living. And when he checked just before bed, he found something new on the porch. Not a leaf this time, but a small folded scrap of cloth worn at the edges. No blood, no name, just a trace of something military-grade, as if part of a harness or pouch had been torn loose. Elwood held it for a long moment, then looked out into the dark. The dog was gone, but the wind that blew past his cheek felt like it carried the memory of a salute. The late summer sun had begun to shift less fire in its bite, more gold in its edges. Crickets buzzed in the tall grass beyond Grant's goods, and somewhere across the road the first rust-brown leaves of the season clung to a dying dogwood tree. Elwood Grant didn't notice the shift in the air, but Nora Bell did. She always did. She arrived at the store with her usual wicker basket, filled with glass jars of pickled okra and preserved peaches, her cane tapping a slow rhythm on the wooden floorboards. The bell above the door gave a half-hearted jingle. Elwood looked up from the counter, where he'd been sorting nails into old mason jars like it meant something. "You're late," he said without looking at her. "You're still alive," she said without missing a beat. He snorted. Nora walked to the register and set down her basket. "You got any more of that grain-free kibble?" Elwood paused. "You get a dog I don't know about?" "No, but yours likes it." He froze mid-reach. "He ain't mine." Nora arched a silver eyebrow. Of course he's not." They stood in that silence for a moment, the kind that fills up space like dust in forgotten corners. Then she said it. "Elwood, you heard about Eleanor Carr, haven't you?" He blinked. "The lady who always wears pearl earrings to church like she's expecting a camera crew? That's the one." He set the jar down harder than necessary. "What's she done now?" Nora leaned in, lowering her voice like the walls might tattle. "She's been pushing hard at the council meetings. Wants to eliminate every unregistered animal in the county. Strays, ferals, even pets without recent paperwork." Elwood frowned. "That's always been on the books." "Sure," Nora said. "But nobody ever enforced it, not like this." "She thinks it's a sanitation thing?" "She says it's about public safety. Claims someone's livestock was attacked near the Carr property. No proof, just talk. But she's real loud about it. And people, well, you know what fear does." Elwood stared out the window. The dog Ash, though he hadn't earned the name yet, was nowhere to be seen, just a dusty patch of gravel where the food bowl sat empty. I'll keep him out of sight. You think that'll be enough? He gave her a look. I fought in a jungle full of landmines, Nora. I think I can hide one dog. She didn't smile. Elwood, she said gently. This town has changed. There's folks here who see shadows where there ain't any, and others who throw rocks before checking if it's a child or a cat. Cars got friends, the kind who don't ask questions when trucks roll through at dawn. He opened his mouth, but she cut him off. She's talking about enforcement measures. That's not just a memo on a bulletin board. That means traps, darts, vans. She already called animal control from 2 counties over. He stiffened. They'll need permission to come on my property. They'll get it, she said, or they won't ask. Elwood walked to the window, the one facing the overgrown field beyond his property line. He squinted as if he could see movement in the distance. You think they'll come for him? I think they won't know what he is, and that makes him a target. He didn't answer. Nora gathered her things, adjusting the basket on her arm. Before she reached the door, she said, That dog's been hurt, Elwood, but he's not broken, and neither are you, no matter how hard you pretend. Don't let this town erase something good just because it walks on 4 legs and don't wear a name tag. The bell rang as she stepped out. That night, the wind picked up early. Thunder rolled somewhere far off, just enough to unsettle the leaves in the gutters and stir the wind chimes on the back porch. Elwood closed up late, the store too quiet, the porch too still. No leaf, no dog. He told himself it didn't matter, that Ash had probably found some other porch, some other fool to bring leaves to. But just before locking up, he heard it. A voice, not outside, inside. Not a real voice, not flesh and blood sound, but something from a memory so old it carried sand in its corners. Protect the asset. No hesitation. He flinched as the words echoed in his chest. The jungle, the boy in the wire trap, the sound a dog made when it took the bullet meant for you. He reached under the counter, felt the cold metal of the old Colt .45, still loaded, still clean. The next morning, he walked into the town's only diner for coffee. Eleanor Carr was there, flanked by 2 men in matching polo shirts with badges on their sleeves. One of them said, "Sweep starting Monday. They'll never see it coming." She smiled, and it wasn't warm. "They don't need to," she replied. "We're not giving them time to run." Elwood didn't finish his coffee. He left a crumpled bill on the counter and walked out, his boots heavy on the tile. He didn't speak as he got home, didn't curse as he yanked open the back shed, didn't flinch when the old footlocker creaked open and the ghost of war blew back in his face. Inside, folded like a flag no one wanted to raise, was the collar, dog tags, his own, and June's. He picked them up, held them in his calloused hand, and walked out to the porch. The wind rustled through the grass. Ash wasn't there yet. But Elwood left the food anyway, and beside the bowl he placed a leaf, just to see what would happen. The air shifted before the sky did. That's how Nora Bell knew. She stood on the back porch of her clapboard house, eyes narrowed to the southeast horizon where heat waves once danced over the Georgia fields. Now the line between land and sky blurred smudged charcoal on a dying canvas. A pressure rolled through the valley like a slow, deep breath no one wanted to exhale. At Grant's Goods, Elwood Grant stirred uneasily in his chair behind the counter, though he wouldn't admit the cause. The oscillating fan hummed beside him, pushing humid air in circles. Sweat formed along his collar, but it wasn't the heat that unsettled him. It was the absence. No leaf today, no ash. For the first time in over a week, the gravel just outside the front door remained untouched. The food bowl sat full beneath the awning still, like it had never been touched. He told himself it was fine. He told himself dogs wander, especially strays. But the truth was, Ash hadn't wandered since that second leaf, and Elwood had started counting the days by them. A knock came around mid-morning, 3 short raps, then a pause, then one longer thump like a warning or a rhythm only old folks remembered. He opened the door and found Nora standing there with a plastic tote, a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. "Storm's coming," she said. "Big one." "I got a radio," he grumbled. "I got instincts." She pushed past him, uninvited but not unwelcome, and set the tote on the counter. Inside, batteries, candles, 2 cans of soup, and a bag of dog kibble. Elwood raised an eyebrow. "In case he comes back," she said. "He's not mine." She tilted her head. "Then why's that bowl out there still got your name on it?" He didn't answer. She moved to the window, peering out at the swollen sky. "Barometric pressure's falling fast. Animals always know first. Cats hide. Birds go quiet. Dogs—" She paused. "Dogs vanish when they're scared." "He's not scared." She glanced at him. "You sure about that?" Elwood crossed his arms. "You come here to play weather woman or to lecture me about ghosts?" She gave a soft chuckle. "Maybe both." Thunder cracked in the far distance, low and rolling, like a warning from a place too big to understand. The kind of sound that stirred something old in a man's bones. The kind that reminded Elwood of nights beneath tin roofs in villages with no names, where lightning wasn't a spectacle. It was a countdown. By late afternoon the sky had dimmed like someone pulled a sheet over the sun. Leaves danced nervously along the street. Shop signs clinked in the wind. And yet, no Ash. Elwood paced the floor, pretended to fix the hinge on the stockroom door. Checked the food bowl again, twice. Still full. Still untouched. Nora watched from her seat near the window, knitting something blue and small, though no baby had been born in town in nearly 6 years. "You're restless," she said quietly. "I'm annoyed," he shot back. "There's a difference." "You know, when June passed," she began, but he cut her off with a look. "Don't." "I was just going to say," she continued, unfazed, "when June passed, the cat she hated, Milo, he sat on her side of the porch every evening for a week. Just waiting. That cat was dumb. That cat was loyal." Elwood looked away. Evening came faster than usual, dragged behind the storm's curtain. The first drops hit the tin roof like slow applause, then faster, then all at once. Thunder cracked again, closer this time. The lights flickered. Nora stood. "That's my cue. You stay dry, you stubborn mule." He didn't stop her, didn't thank her. Just watched her silhouette blur against the downpour as she disappeared beneath her plastic poncho. He stood at the door a moment longer, watching, listening. No pause, no leaf, only rain. He left the porch light on that night. Not for himself, not for burglars. He hadn't locked the store in 20 years, but for something he couldn't name. For a dog he wouldn't claim. For a rhythm that had, without his permission, become a heartbeat in his quiet life. The rain fell harder. Somewhere a gutter gave way with a groan. Elwood pulled a blanket tighter around his shoulders and muttered to himself, "Damn dog probably found some barn to hide in." But his hand stayed near the door. All night. Just in case. the storm did not let up. By midnight, the town of Wayridge felt swallowed whole. Trees bent in the wind like kneeling giants. Lightning laced the sky in crooked fingers. The tin roof of Grant's goods shuddered beneath the weight of water and wind. Inside, Elwood Grant sat in darkness. He hadn't meant to turn off the lights, but when the power flickered a third time, he took it as a sign. Better to sit with the dark than argue with it. He leaned against the wall behind the front counter, an old wool blanket draped across his shoulders, boots still on. A mug of coffee had gone cold an hour ago beside him. The generator hummed out back, barely keeping the freezer alive. But Elwood didn't care about the ice cream inventory. He cared about a food bowl, still full, still untouched, and a ghost that refused to stop walking through his mind. It started with the sound of boots on sand. Too many boots, too fast. He hadn't dreamed of Iraq in years. But now, with every crack of thunder, it was like the desert bled through the floorboards. Dust in the air, screams he couldn't localize, the scent of diesel, sweat, and something worse, burned metal. He saw the boy again, the one with the copper ring around his neck from the explosive collar. He heard the voice in his ear, "Get clear, Grant, now!" And the dog, not Ash, but another, lighter fur, name stitched on the collar, Reaper. He saw the dog run into the blast like it understood sacrifice better than the men behind it. Then a different scream, higher, closer, June's. Elwood jerked awake, except he hadn't been asleep. The blanket had fallen to the floor. His shirt clung to his back like a second skin. His chest heaved. The storm was still raging, but now it sounded like it was inside him. He stumbled to the window. The bowl still sat under the awning, silver, round, and glinting slightly beneath the flicker of lightning. The kibble inside was dry but untouched, though the puddle nearby said rain had tried to find it. Elwood leaned his forehead to the glass, breath fogging the pane. His eyes searched the shadows, a habit he'd never shaken, the urge to scan for movement, to count breaths, not his own. Nothing moved. No pause, no leaf, no dog. He cursed under his breath, not at Ash, at himself. June had died on a night like this, not with thunder, but with sirens. The ambulance hadn't made it to the ridge in time. He had held her hand through the windshield, her blood soaking the dashboard. She had smiled, damn it, and told him, "It's okay, Wood. Go find the dog." She'd been chasing a lost puppy. That was June, always trying to save something small. He never found the dog, just a broken leash tangled in blackberry vines. It had haunted him for 20 years. And now, here he was again, watching rain soak another promise he hadn't made. He didn't even like dogs. He moved to the door, cracked it open. The wind bit into his face immediately, flinging a few drops of rain against his cheeks like warnings. Still, he stepped out. The wood of the porch was slick. His boots thudded softly as he crossed to the edge of the overhang. The bowl remained still. He bent down, gently scooped it up, turned it over into his hand, same number of pieces as yesterday. He stared into the dark street, illuminated now and then by flashes of stormlight. "Where the hell are you?" he whispered. The wind didn't answer, but for a brief second, a shape moved past the far hedge. A trick of light, a shadow, or memory. He stayed there longer than he meant to, holding the bowl, letting the storm soak the cuffs of his pants. Eventually, he placed the bowl back down, this time with a flat rock inside it to keep the food from blowing away. Then he left the door open a crack, just in case. It was just past dawn on the third day. The rain had finally broken, leaving behind a thick film of mist that clung to the trees like breath held too long. The streets of Weyridge glistened, gutters bloated with muddy water and maple leaves curled like tiny drowned sails. Elwood stood barefoot on the back step of his store, a steaming cup of black coffee in one hand, his other hand resting against the frame like he wasn't sure if he wanted to go in or never leave again. The night had chewed through his sleep. His dreams were a mess of sand and teeth and barking he couldn't place. He hadn't checked the food bowl yet. He didn't need to. He knew it would still be full. The storm had taken Ash. That's what he told himself. Dogs were smart, survivors. Maybe the shepherd had found shelter, followed his instincts back into the woods, back into whatever life he'd come from. But that didn't explain the ache in Elwood's chest every time he glanced toward the edge of town to where the tree line met the gravel. Didn't explain why he kept whispering, "Not again. Not another one." He walked to the front door. The air still smelled like electricity, and that's when he heard it. The sound was soft, softer than a paw step, more like the scrape of fabric over gravel. But it was intentional, not the random rustle of wind or garbage bins tipping in puddles. Elwood's head snapped toward the sound. And there, half emerged from the fog, barely more than a silhouette, stood the dog. Ash, soaked through, fur plastered to his ribs, mud caking his paws, a small gash bleeding at his flank. But he was upright, alive, and in his mouth, dangling like a flag barely clinging to a pole, was a strip of heavy canvas. At first, Elwood thought it was just some tattered scrap. But as Ash limped closer, each shaky step pressing into the gravel with a quiet stubbornness, Elwood saw the truth. The cloth was deep green, military issue, frayed along one edge, the center soaked with blood still fresh, and stitched into one corner was a patch, faded but unmistakable. U.S. Army, K-9 Unit, Fort Branning. Elwood's breath caught in his throat. He dropped the coffee. It shattered on the porch. Ash stopped at the foot of the steps, eyes locked onto his. Those eyes, they weren't pleading. They were reporting, like a soldier to a superior, like he'd finished the mission and returned, even if it meant crawling through hell to get back. Elwood stepped forward slowly, like approaching a ghost that might vanish with one wrong move. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, voice thick, cracking. Ash didn't flinch. He placed the cloth gently on the wood, then sat. Not just sat posted, back straight, head high, formal, intentional. Elwood's knees buckled. He dropped to the boards in front of the dog, rainwater soaking through the seat of his pants, hands shaking as he reached out, not to touch, not yet, but just to be near. "Where the hell have you been?" he whispered, not angry, not scolding, just broken. Ash tilted his head. A low, exhausted whine escaped him, barely audible, but full of meaning. And in that moment, Elwood Grant, the man who had buried a war, a marriage, and too many comrades to count, felt something shift. It wasn't the cloth. It wasn't even the dog. It was the look. The look that said, "I saw something terrible. I need you to understand. I came back because someone has to stop it." The wind picked up again, curling the fabric at Elwood's feet like it still wanted to speak. He looked down at the patch again. The blood wasn't just dried, it was smeared, as if a hand had clutched it in desperation, or a jaw had torn it from someone who never made it out. Ash rested his head against Elwood's thigh. Finally, Elwood touched him. Not a pat, not a pet, just one hand, flat and still, resting against the dog's wet neck. The contact broke something in him, and he didn't fight it, didn't push it down like he had for years. He just let it sit there. The silence, the knowing, the terrible weight of it all, and somewhere, just beyond the edge of their shared pain, a promise began to take shape. The morning after Ash's return broke like a breath held too long. The storm had passed, leaving branches like snapped bones across the back roads, and puddles so wide they blurred the distinction between asphalt and ditch. But inside Elwood's store, something else was breaking quietly, but completely. The cloth lay on the counter, its blood-stained insignia pressed beneath a paperweight shaped like a peach. Elwood hadn't moved it since last night. Couldn't. He stood at the rear door, staring at his reflection in the glass, part ghost, part stranger. In one hand was his old military flashlight, in the other, his Glock. It had been years since he'd touched it. The weight of it now felt biblical. Ash paced near the threshold, healed just enough to be dangerous. The dog's eyes kept flicking to the woods beyond the store, his tail a low, anxious pendulum. "Whatever you saw out there," Elwood muttered, "you want me to see it too." Ash stilled. That was answer enough. He grabbed his jacket-green canvas, frayed at the seams, the name patch still faintly legible over the breast. Grant. A ghost from a life he thought he'd sealed in a box long ago. His hand hesitated over the zipper. Then he heard her voice. "Hope that flashlight works," Nora said from the back door, her silver hair tucked beneath a wool cap, a duffel bag slung across her shoulder like she meant business. "It gets real dark where we're going." Elwood turned slowly. Nora Bell stood there like the wind hadn't touched her. Calm, unshakable, her face lined with time, but eyes sharp as ever. He sighed. "No." "Yes. Eleanor Carr's probably watching my place like a hawk. You can't just—" "I'm not here for a vote." She stepped forward, past Ash, who gave a single approving chuff. "You're not doing this alone." Elwood crossed his arms. "This isn't one of your food drives, Nora. If what I think's out there—" "I know what's out there," she said quietly. "You think I never heard the rumors? Dogs going missing, crates showing up in night vans, lights in the woods? You think I never saw you watching the horizon like something out there was still waiting to find you?" He blinked, startled by the precision of her words. She took a breath. "I buried a Marine, Elwood. I can handle a few trees." Silence. Only the creak of the fan and the far-off sound of a mourning dove. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not just a widow, not just the woman who left casseroles on his steps when he hadn't asked, but someone who'd walked her own kind of war, alone, and survived. He nodded once. A pact sealed. Nora opened her duffel, revealing a flare gun, 2 water bottles, a roll of gauze, and what looked suspiciously like a pack of peanut butter crackers. Elwood almost smiled. Almost. "Okay," he said, grabbing his keys. "We'll drive as far as the trail. After that, we follow the dog." Ash stood. His body still limped slightly, but his stance was clear. Ready. Elwood holstered the Glock, slid the flashlight into his belt loop, and opened the door. The woods waited, silent and dripping. As they stepped outside, Nora reached into her pocket and handed Elwood something small, something warm. It was her husband's dog tag. "Just in case," she said. "For strength." He looked down at the tarnished metal, then at the dog by his side, then at the woman who wasn't supposed to come, but had. The decision was made, not just to go, but to finally stop running. The woods swallowed sound. Even the birds had gone silent. No morning chatter, no rustling wings, just the occasional snap of a branch underfoot and the quiet thud of Ash's paws ahead, moving with purpose. Elwood trudged behind, his boots sinking half an inch with every step. The trail, if it ever was a trail, had been turned to sludge by the summer storm. Trees leaned in tight, pine needles brushing shoulders, casting long shadows even though the sun hadn't yet set. "Elwood," Nora called softly behind him, her breath already labored. "You sure this dog knows where he's going?" He didn't answer, just pushed another branch aside and stepped over a tangle of roots. But the truth sat uneasy in his gut. Ash hadn't looked back once. That wasn't uncertainty. That was memory. He was retracing something. "Watch that slope," Elwood said over his shoulder. "Mud's soft. You fall, you stay low." "Don't worry," Nora huffed. "My knees gave up years ago. I stay low by default." Despite everything, the storm wreckage, the dread crawling up his spine, Elwood let out the faintest grunt of a laugh. Only she could joke in a place like this. 20 minutes in, the air changed. It thickened, grew wetter. The scent of decaying leaves gave way to something more metallic, old rust and standing water. The tree line twisted, no longer Georgia-friendly pine, but gnarled oaks that bent in unnatural ways as if hiding secrets in their trunks. Ash paused. His ears twitched, head low, nose to ground. He stepped left. Elwood followed. They crossed a narrow washout where floodwater had eaten the path whole. Mud came up to their shins. Nora slipped once. Elwood caught her arm before she fell. Her jacket was soaked from the elbow down. "You all right?" he asked, more worried than his voice let on. She looked up at him, teeth clenched. "I didn't come all this way to be babied." "Didn't say you were," he muttered. But he offered her a hand for the next step anyway. They moved like that for another half hour. Ash ahead, Elwood close behind, Nora bringing up the rear, slower but steady. Each footstep pulled a little more breath from their lungs, a little more warmth from their bones. Elwood's military instincts buried for years began to surface like muscle memory. The way he scanned tree lines, the way he noted broken branches, fresh tracks. The quiet internal clock measuring distance, time, vulnerability. His breath slowed, his vision sharpened. It was like walking back into the jungle, but colder, quieter, more haunted. A sharp cry snapped him out of it. Not an animal, Nora. He turned fast, saw her caught on a branch, a tear blooming across her coat. Her knee bent awkwardly. She waved him off before he could speak. "Just give me a second." "You twisted it?" "No," she said, clearly lying. "Just a stretch. Keep going." Elwood didn't move. Ash had stopped too, watching them from ahead, unmoving in the underbrush, his ears flat, his body patient, like he knew, like he'd been here before, waiting for people slower, more fragile, but still willing. Elwood helped Nora up. She winced but stood. "Let's move." They pressed forward. Eventually they reached a narrowing ravine where trees stood like sentries on either side. Ash dipped low, belly brushing the mud, and disappeared beneath a curtain of vines. Elwood followed and immediately dropped into a crouch. There, faint in the distance, was a flicker of light. Lantern, candle, something human. He motioned for Nora to stop. She leaned against a tree, hand over her chest, nodding. Sweat streaked the grime on her face. Ash looked back for the first time, and held Elwood's gaze. Something passed between them. Not command, not instinct, a silent knowing, a warning. Elwood swallowed hard. The mud sucked at his boots as he moved forward again, closer to whatever lay beyond that flicker of light. And behind him, Nora limped forward anyway. The trees gave way without warning. One moment the woods were suffocating, vines wrapping like fingers, branches snatching at hair and clothing. The next, it opened up into a small clearing that felt unnatural, like a scar in the forest. The air was still, too still, and there it stood. A cabin, if you could still call it that, slumped under the weight of years and rot. Its roof sagged on one side. One window was boarded, another cracked like a spider web. Candlelight flickered faintly behind a threadbare curtain, orange and wavering. Elwood raised a hand, signaling Nora to hang back. She nodded, pressing herself to the thick trunk of a cedar tree, one hand gripping a walking branch like it was an old rifle. Ash didn't hesitate. The dog slunk low, tail stiff, ears erect, not in fear, but in sharp purpose. He veered left, skirting the edge of the clearing, nose twitching toward something not visible to human senses. Elwood followed. There, tucked behind the cabin, half swallowed by thorns and years of leaf rot, was a lean-to shed. Tin roof, sagging beam, rusted hinges. It looked like the kind of place animals crawled into when they wanted to die alone. But from inside, a sound. Soft, fragile, a whimper. No, not one. Several, layered, overlapping. Elwood's breath hitched. It wasn't the sound of pain. Not quite. It was the sound of waiting. He stepped forward slowly, boots crunching over damp straw and shards of broken glass. The door wasn't latched, just wedged shut by the weight of rot and mud. He braced his shoulder and pushed. It groaned open. The smell hit him first, sour and old. Urine, damp, blood. Then the heat, heavy and wrong, like the breath of something dying. And then eyes, 6 sets, all glassy, all wide, 6 tiny bodies huddled together in the far corner, pressed into a filthy pile of straw. German shepherds, barely old enough to stand. Their fur was matted with dirt, their ribs sharp as blades beneath skin. One of them twitched, but didn't lift its head. Elwood stood frozen. They didn't bark, didn't growl, just waited. And that was what broke him. Ash entered quietly, stepping around him as if this place was already known. He moved toward the pups, nose low, tail still. They recognized him. One tried to stand and collapsed. Another let out a keening cry that sounded more like a question than a complaint. Ash sat beside them, not touching, not crowding, just being there. Nora appeared behind Elwood, eyes wide, hand to her mouth. She took a slow step in. "Oh, God," she whispered, "they're just babies." Elwood dropped to one knee, ignoring the ache that flared through his joints. He reached a tentative hand toward the nearest pup. It flinched, then slowly pressed its tiny head into his palm. It wasn't asking for anything, just warmth. Nora was already digging in her bag, pulling out the small emergency thermos of broth she'd brought, just in case. She unscrewed the lid and poured a few drops into the palm of her hand, holding it out. One of the pups crawled toward her. Another followed. Ash remained still, a sentinel amid the wounded. "Where's the mother?" Nora asked, voice cracking. Elwood didn't answer. Not yet, because part of him already knew. He stepped out of the shed and walked along the side of the cabin, eyes scanning, lungs working harder now. The stench of death was faint, but present, lingering like a ghost. He found her behind the woodpile. A full-grown German shepherd, black and tan. Her body was twisted, her belly deflated from nursing, her muzzle bruised and bloodied. Rope still hung around her neck, half chewed through, beaten, starved, murdered. Elwood dropped to a squat beside her. The heat of rage boiled in his chest, but deeper than that, guilt, the kind that sneaks in when you're too late. He didn't look away. "Damn," he muttered. Back at the shed, Nora had wrapped two of the pups in an old towel. Ash was curled on one side of them now, forming a wall with his body. Three others clung to each other, their breathing shallow, rapid. Elwood returned slowly and said only one word: "Dead." Nora's face stiffened, but she didn't cry. She adjusted her grip on the towel, then met his eyes. "Then we take the living, all of them." He nodded. Ash looked up, and for the first time Elwood saw it. Not just intelligence, but grief. Deep and quiet, buried like bones. This dog hadn't just stumbled on the pups. He had protected them. He had led them here. He had asked for help, and Elwood had finally heard. The air inside the shed was heavy, thicker than before. Not just from the stench of mold and wet fur, but from something far harder to name: loss. Ash had stopped at a pile of straw in the back, tail stiff, body trembling. His nose brushed the edge of a shape that hadn't moved since they entered. He didn't bark. He didn't whimper. He just lay down. Gently, slowly, curling his body beside what remained of her. Nora was the first to step closer. Her lantern's glow caught the outline matted fur, once thick and proud, now caked with blood and rot. A German shepherd, larger than Ash. Her belly still distended, the kind of weight only mothers carried. Flies had claimed parts of her, but her eyes were still open, and they were looking at nothing. Nora covered her mouth. "Oh, God." Elwood stayed by the door, his fists clenched, jaw tight, the flashlight trembling in his hand. He didn't blink, didn't speak. Ash nudged the lifeless muzzle with his nose. Once, twice, then rested his chin across her neck. It was the quiet that crushed them, not the sight, not the smell, but the absolute absence of sound, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath, as if grief had entered the room and demanded silence. "She fought," Nora whispered, barely audible. Elwood's eyes flickered to the dark crimson stain spreading beneath the mother's body. Nearby, claw marks scratched the wood floor, desperate, erratic. And in the far corner, a thick wooden club lay discarded. Splinters clung to it like broken teeth. Ash didn't move. "He stayed with her," Nora said, tears streaking down her dirt-smudged cheeks. "All this time, he never left her." Elwood looked at the dog now, how his chest barely rose, how he trembled but refused to whine. He looked like a soldier at a final watch, a last stand at a grave no one else would dig. And Elwood saw himself. The room blurred. Memory surged of a hospital tent in Fallujah, of a medic's voice saying, "She's gone," of the way his wife's ring felt in his palm, cold, too small for the weight it carried. He staggered back a step. Nora caught his arm. "I can't," he muttered. "You have to." He nodded once, but didn't step forward, just stared at Ash. The blood, the broken ribs barely visible under fur. And somehow, even through that, the quiet dignity with which Ash stood sentinel. A pup whimpered behind them. One of the six, eyes barely open, had crawled toward the mother's body. Nora knelt, scooping it up before it could touch her. No more, she whispered. Not for them. Ash finally lifted his head, and in his eyes Elwood saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Not pain, purpose. Ash didn't just grieve. He stayed because he was waiting, because he'd brought them here, because this wasn't the end. Elwood swallowed hard and stepped forward. He knelt beside the body, reached out, and with hands that once held rifles and graves, he gently closed the mother's eyes. A gesture older than words, older than war. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Outside, the wind picked up. The trees creaked like old bones shifting. But inside that shed, beside that body, a vow was being born. They weren't going to run. Not now. Not with pups still breathing. Not with Ash still watching. Not while the blood was still fresh. The pups had quieted. Not from comfort, but exhaustion. Their tiny sides rose and fell with an unsettling rhythm, like clock hands running slow. Nora stroked the runt absently, murmuring soft nothings to no one in particular. Elwood crouched by the warped shed door, one ear tuned to the cabin just a few yards away. Ash stood rigid beside him, ears forward, body locked like stone, and then boots, gravel crunch, voices. Elwood held up a hand instinctively, a signal from another life. Nora froze mid-stroke. Even the pups seemed to sense it, the air snapping tight like a wire pulled taut. Ash sank into the shadows. The cabin door creaked open. A lantern flickered inside. Then came the first voice, gruff, low, and soaked in southern drawl. "Carver wants the next shipment ready by Thursday, no screw-ups this time." A second voice answered, younger, agitated. "We're pushing the females too fast. They're not healing between cycles. One already turned on the handler." A heavy thud, boots hitting floorboards. The first man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Then you put a bullet in the temperamental ones. That's why we've got backups. What's the status on the Ash line?" Silence. Then, "We think the male that got out was him. Scar matches. Eye spacing, too. That bloodline's not just good, it's government engineered." Elwood stiffened. Ash. Not a name. A designation. Something cold swept through him. He glanced at the dog beside him, whose body remained frozen, but eyes burned. The younger man lowered his voice now, words coming faster. "I told Carver it was a mistake to sell to the Russians without final vetting. If this gets traced, it won't. They've got their own dogs over there. Same ethics, less paperwork." More footsteps. Wood creaked. Glass clinked. "And the ones that don't pass the tests? Euthanized or used for bite training. Either way, they don't leave a trail." Nora pressed a hand over her mouth. Her eyes, so often soft and knowing, were wide with fury. Elwood's jaw locked. They weren't talking about dogs anymore. They were talking about weapons, disposable ones, designed in silence, sold in bulk, forgotten once broken. He could hear paper being shuffled, maybe notes, manifests, or photos. The older voice returned, more thoughtful now. "One of the pups tested with a grip response at 5 weeks. That's accelerated. We may have another candidate." "We're wasting time in this dump," the younger snapped. "That old man saw something. The town's talking. People saw the dog." "Doesn't matter. The sweep's scheduled. Carr's got animal control and county enforcement eating out of her hand. By Friday, every stray in a 10-mile radius will be gone quiet and legal." Outside the shed, Ash's ears twitched once, then silence again. Elwood looked at the animal, and for a moment he saw not a dog, but a soldier, waiting for the next command. He leaned toward Nora, barely a whisper. "We can't stay here." She nodded. Ash turned his head eyes flicking between them. A door slammed. Boots stomped out. The men passed within yards of the shed, laughing, grumbling about damp air and weak batteries. One lit a cigarette. The smell drifted in. Ash didn't move, not even a breath. And when the voices faded into the dark, Elwood finally exhaled. He turned back to Nora. His voice shook just a little. "This isn't just cruelty. It's a business. A goddamn factory." Nora nodded, her voice flat. "A war machine, using animals who can't say no." Ash stepped forward then, nosing the crack of the shed door, ears angled toward the woods, as if sensing what came next. "They'll be back," Elwood muttered, "and they'll be armed." "Then we don't wait?" Ash growled once low, barely audible. A sound of warning or permission. The world outside the shed had gone still again. Elwood crouched near the door, one hand tight around the grip of his old Glock, the other pressed to the damp earth as if grounding himself. The stink of blood, wet fur, and moldy straw clung to his clothes. But it wasn't the smell that churned his stomach. It was the choice forming in front of him. He glanced at Nora. She was cradling one of the pups, the runt, the same one that had barely made a sound all night. Her hands moved gently over its trembling sides, as if trying to stitch something broken with only warmth and willpower. "We move now," Elwood said. "They're light on guards." "One man outside. I can slip through the south window, grab their layout, maybe even get photos." Nora didn't look up. "And the dogs?" "We'll come back." She shook her head. "No, Elwood, you go. I stay." He straightened. "Like hell you do." But she met his eyes, steel behind silver. That calm defiance he'd only seen once before, decades ago, when she stood alone at her husband's graveside and refused to cry for the reporters. "I buried a Marine, Elwood," she said, voice firm. "I've stood in worse places than this, holding on to something smaller and weaker and more terrified than me. You want to stop this? Then go. But these babies, they're not getting left behind again." The silence that followed was thick like fog wrapping the ribs. He wanted to argue. He wanted to drag her out with him. But he knew that look. She wasn't bluffing, and she wasn't afraid. He nodded slowly. "Keep low. No lights. If I'm not back in an hour—" "I'll wait too," she cut in, softening. "Then I run like hell with 6 dogs in a sack." A huff of something like laughter escaped his nose. Elwood turned to Ash. The dog stood at the ready, tail still, body tense, muscles coiled, instinct waiting. Elwood paused. "You coming with me, soldier?" Ash didn't move. Instead, the German shepherd glanced back toward the puppies, then forward again. The indecision in his eyes felt almost human. "I get it," Elwood muttered. "Orders have changed." Ash took 2 steps forward, nudged Elwood's hand with his nose, then backed away and sat beside Nora, watching, waiting. Elwood felt a tightness in his throat, something older than memory, older than language. It wasn't disobedience. It was trust. Ash was entrusting him with the mission. One final glance. Then Elwood slipped into the trees, the Glock now warm in his palm. The shed behind him faded into shadows. Somewhere beyond the rise, voices stirred again. Steel doors opened. The operation breathed. He moved like he had decades ago, quiet, trained, deadly. But this time, he wasn't just walking into enemy territory. This time, he was walking into a reckoning. The trees thinned. Elwood pressed his back against a pine slick with rain, breathing through his nose. The sound of the generator reached him first. Low, chugging, angry. It was the only unnatural thing in a forest that had gone still as bone. He edged forward, inch by inch, boots barely whispering over the damp undergrowth. Moonlight caught on corrugated metal ahead, a makeshift roof tacked onto a long building that might have once been a hunting lodge. Now it pulsed with heat and menace. The wolves weren't wild animals. They were men, 4 of them. Elwood counted quickly. Positions, weapons, exits. One near the side door, smoking. Lean, tensed, a rifle slung low. Another paced by a stack of crates, speaking into a radio. The other 2 stood in the center of the camp under a tarp canopy, going over a manifest lit by lantern light. Military-grade gear lay open in a nearby case, combat knives, tranquilizers, shock collars. Everything sterile, clinical, as if cruelty was a science. A 5th man came into view briefly, not armed, clipboard in hand, hair slicked back. Civvy clothes, but posture that screamed command. Carver? Elwood didn't blink. He was close enough now to make out voices, bits, pieces. Shipment leaves Sunday 2 adults, 7 pups, no deviation. Buyers in Omsk already wired half. Tell the Colombian to wait his damn turn. These bloodlines are too rare to rush. Bloodlines. The word stuck like a splinter. Not dogs, not partners, products. He eased lower, angling toward a cracked window on the far wall of the lodge. Inside, under sick yellow light, a whiteboard bore initials and serials names next to checkboxes. Adapted, non-compliant, terminated. Rows of cages lined the back wall, most empty. But Elwood saw stains, scratches, bent steel, and something else. A photograph pinned beside the whiteboard. He couldn't see it clearly, but he knew that face. Ash. Younger. Clean coat. Still wearing his tag. Sergeant Ash, 7R112. Elwood's jaw clenched. That one? A voice cut in, louder now. Sergeant Ash, lost in Kabul, 2013. Rumor said he dragged 2 wounded Marines across a minefield. Smartest we ever bred. Never should have gone MIA. They don't go missing, someone else replied. They run. Instinct. But that one? He's worth 10 grand just in blood extraction. Clone value alone is nuts. Elwood's stomach turned. Ash hadn't just escaped something brutal. He'd survived something unspeakable. Elwood's fingers flexed around the Glock. Old rage, stirred, slow, and volcanic. It was the kind of rage that had once made him feared in the jungle, but now it made him dangerous for another reason. He knew exactly how not to be seen. A branch cracked. He froze. One of the guards had started moving toward the tree line, toward him. Elwood flattened, the earth wet beneath his belly. The crunch of boots neared. He counted the seconds. 3, 4, 5, and then a howl. Not a scream, not panic, but precise, sharp, echoing from the ridge. Ash. A call to action or a warning? The guard paused, turned, raised his rifle. You hear that? Coyote, another muttered. Or that damn stray again. They laughed. But Elwood didn't, because Ash wasn't warning them. He was warning him. Elwood backed away, careful, cold, calculating. He didn't need confirmation anymore. He had seen it. Not a kennel, not a camp, a machine. One that bred obedience and killed everything else. And it had Ash's prints all over it. The moon had slipped behind thick clouds, darkening the woods into a grainy, humid black. Elwood huddled behind a fallen log, soaked to the bone and shivering, not from cold but from what he had just seen. The generator hummed on like a predator purring in its sleep. From the cracked window, voices filtered out, sharper now, urgent. "The mail's back in play," one man said. "Seen near Elkridge. Matching markings, same gate. And the leaf thing? That's behavioral imprinting." "That's not possible," another replied. "Ash was listed KIA 5 years ago. He disappeared in Kabul. The handler died. The whole unit gone." Elwood's pulse slowed to a dangerous calm. He wasn't surprised. Not anymore. Ash was never just a stray. No mutt sits like that. No stray finds its way through a war-shattered man's defenses like that. This was bred precision. "Forget KIA. That dog's blood made half this litter," said the clipboard man carver most likely. "You don't get lines like his anymore. Pain tolerance, object loyalty, facial recall, scent tracking across months. You get why Omsk and Bogota both want dibs?" The other man scoffed. "And what about the runt?" "Low yield, low drive, will cull. But the rest? They're already tagged for split sail search and destroy in Colombia, perimeter defense for the compound in Dagestan." The words didn't fully register until Elwood saw the metal crate. It was tucked behind the supply tent, half covered in burlap. On its side, a sticker from a military courier service long defunct. Stenciled in fading ink, 7R112, property of U.S. Naval K-9 Unit, Sajidine, Ash. Elwood stared at it until his eyes burned. They hadn't just used Ash. They'd owned him. And now they were carving up his legacy puppy by puppy, trait by trait, feeding it into machines with human faces and hollow hearts. Something curdled inside him. He backed away from the window, quiet, careful. But his mind was howling now. Images crashing in, the leaf in Ash's mouth day after day, the way he never crossed the threshold, the discipline in his sit, the hesitation before eating, the unnatural stillness in thunderstorms. Ash wasn't wandering. Ash was waiting. Waiting for someone who might still see the soldier behind the scars. Waiting for someone broken enough to understand what it meant to be trained. Then discarded. Ash had been leading him here the whole time. And the pups, the bloodline, they were more than victims. They were proof. Proof that even in hell something good could be born. Something that could be saved. Elwood pressed a hand against the damp earth. The old calluses under his fingertips hadn't softened much over the years, but his heart had. Slowly, unwillingly, and now too late to pretend otherwise. He looked up at the night sky and muttered more prayer than curse. "You clever damn dog." A crack echoed in the forest. A branch under boot. Someone was moving again. Elwood didn't flinch. He'd seen enough. And Sergeant Ash had done his part. Now it was his turn. The forest didn't breathe. It listened. Elwood slid backward from the cabin's edge, boot catching on a slick of pine needles. It was the smallest misstep, half an inch of lost balance, the faintest scrape of sole against bark. But it was enough. Snap. Inside the cabin, voices cut off like a blade through rope. "What was that?" Outside. Sounded west side. Flashlight beams flared through the cracked window. One man's silhouette shifted toward the door. Elwood cursed under his breath and ducked behind a rotted stump. Heart pounding, hands trembling, not with fear, but fury. Then a sound behind him. Not human. A soft, low growl, more vibration than voice. Ash. The German shepherd had materialized beside him like fog over graves. Mud streaked his flanks. One eye glinted in the dark. And in that one glance, Elwood understood without words, "You run. I'll fix this." "I'm telling you, it came from out here." The cabin door burst open. A man with a shotgun stepped onto the porch, beam scanning the undergrowth. Then it happened fast. Ash leapt from cover not toward the man, but away, toward the clearing's far edge. Not silent this time. Barking, loud and ragged, drawing attention like a flare. "There! The damn mutt! Get it!" The shotgun cracked once. Trees splintered. Ash kept running. Elwood didn't. He ran the other way, ducking into the dense brush, heart screaming with every step. The sound of pursuit veered off toward Ash, toward the dog who refused to break formation. Even now, branches whipped his face. The taste of copper rose in his throat. But Elwood didn't stop until he reached the hollowed pine where Nora waited, arms cradling the smallest of the pups, eyes wide with panic. "What happened?" she asked. He collapsed against the bark, gasping. He pulled them, took the heat. "Ash?" He nodded once, barked, made himself loud, got them off me. Nora swallowed. "And you let him?" Elwood didn't answer. Because what could he say? That he let a soldier go dark alone? That he'd learned nothing from the ghosts that visited him nightly? No. He hadn't let him go. Ash had chosen. That's what soldiers did. They picked the spot where they stood, even if it killed them. Silence wrapped around the hollow like gauze. Only the pups stirred, one whimpering in its sleep. Nora reached over, her fingers brushing his bloodied knuckles. "He'll come back." Elwood didn't respond. He couldn't, because for the first time since burying his wife, he felt something sharp and paralyzing break through the numbness. Hope. And that kind of thing, it came at a cost. Somewhere in the distance a shot echoed again, but this time there was no bark, only silence. And Elwood felt it like a bullet straight through the chest. The hollow beneath the fallen oak was barely a crawl space, jagged roots thick with soil, and old fungus curled above them like fingers clenched in prayer. The rain had softened everything. Mud seeped into boots, breath fogged in the tight air. And yet Elwood didn't move. Neither did Nora. They lay curled around the 6 pups, bodies forming a crude shield against the cold, against the dark, against them. And Max, no longer just a stray, no longer just a dog, stood between that hollow and the world. Not barking, not whining, just watching, just listening. Every shift of the trees, every broken twig. His ears twitched like radar, nose raised to scent the wind. And then a voice, low, human, too close. "They're around here. Dogs don't vanish, especially one like him." A second voice, rougher and full of venom. "That male dog's head is mine." Elwood's jaw clenched. He wanted to stand, wanted to load every regret into the chamber of that old Glock and put something final into the man who said those words. But the pups stirred. One yawned, a squeaky, fragile sound that made Nora's fingers tighten over its body, shushing gently. The flashlight beam passed. It sliced the clearing like a scalpel, narrow, merciless. Caught for a split second on Max's flank. He didn't flinch, just shifted one paw forward, body low but unyielding, muscles tense like coiled cable. He knew what this was. A sentry's watch. A soldier's last post. Above them leaves trembled. The men's boots crunched through wet brush, fading and returning like a tide. "You sure he came this way?" "I'm telling you, look at the prints. And blood. The bastard's wounded." Blood. Elwood pressed his hand over his mouth. It wasn't Ash's. He was sure of it now. It was Max's. He hadn't run away to hide. He'd doubled back to find them, to guard them, and now, bleeding, outnumbered, and exposed, he refused to retreat. Time bent. It always did in moments like this. Elwood remembered a bunker in Da Nang, the way his best friend had stayed behind during a mortar blitz to pull 3 wounded kids out of a crater. The man had died smiling, said it was worth it, said it was right. And now here he was, years later, curled beneath a root, watching a dog make the same choice with the same quiet conviction. Nora whispered, "Elwood." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but reverence. He met her eyes. Something unspoken passed between them. She'd buried a Marine. He'd buried a wife. And now, together, they might bury this noble, wounded shadow standing between good and evil. And still, Max didn't move. Not when the men stopped just feet away. Not when a flashlight hovered over the hollow for a breathless second before veering away. Not when the taller one muttered, "We'll sweep the ridge. If he's not dead already, he will be by nightfall." Then they were gone. Max waited 5 minutes more before his body finally sagged, not from fear, from pain. Elwood crawled out first, hands sunk into the wet earth. He moved slowly, inch by inch, until he reached Max. The dog turned his head. Elwood whispered, "You held the line, soldier." Max leaned his weight into him, not collapsing, not whining, just leaning, just breathing. And behind them, in the darkness of the root hollow, 6 tiny hearts beat in fragile rhythm, still alive, because of him. For a long time no one moved. The forest held its breath. Rain had slowed to a mist, a fine shiver in the air that clung to every surface. Elwood crouched beside Max, fingers ghosting over the dark smear along the dog's ribs. Not deep, but bad enough. Max panted shallowly, ears still pivoting to every noise beyond the veil of trees. Behind them, under the fallen oak, Nora rocked the smallest of the pups in her lap. The others nuzzled close to her boots. They were tired, hungry, but alive. And then, voices, again, closer this time. "Flashlight's dying, move your ass." "They're near, I can smell 'em." Elwood's grip tightened around the pistol. They didn't have time, and Max knew it. Something shifted in the dog's body, a subtle tension in his back legs, a kind of weightless stillness Elwood hadn't seen since Kandahar. The silence before the charge, before the breach, before the sacrifice. "No," Elwood whispered. "No, not like this." But Max had already decided. In a flash of motion he bolted, not toward the hollow, not toward safety, into the storm-drenched trees. It happened in seconds. The brush split open, Max's form a blur between trunks, muscles surging, wounded flank forgotten. His bark shattered the quiet, short, clipped furious. A soldier's call to battle. "He's there! The male, he's go!" Gunshots cracked. First one, then 2 more. Leaves exploded overhead. Bark flew from a pine trunk. Crows burst from a nearby branch and vanished into the fog. Nora shrieked, but muffled it behind her palm. Elwood didn't move, couldn't. His knees felt locked in wet stone, and then a shotgun blast, louder than the others. heavier, final. The forest swallowed the sound. Even the wind seemed to stop. The rain fell again, soft as breath, cruel as memory. No more barking, no more footsteps, just the hiss of mist settling on leaves that would never be the same. Nora crawled to his side, eyes wide, her voice a crackling whisper. "Elwood?" He couldn't answer. Max had run into the woods to save them, to save the pups, to give them one more breath, one more second. And now silence wrapped the forest like a shroud. "I should have stopped him," Elwood muttered, voice gravel-soaked in grief. But even as he said it, he knew he was lying to himself. Max didn't want to be stopped. He chose it, like all the good ones did. They lay still for a while, neither daring to speak. Until one of the pups, the smallest, crawled forward through the wet underbrush and nuzzled Elwood's boot. And in that small, shivering gesture, the man felt something fracture. Not break, just shift. The weight of sacrifice settling into the soil around them. The sky opened up again. Rain, cold and sharp like falling needles, poured through the canopy, flattening leaves and washing the blood from the earth as if trying too late to rinse away what had been done. Elwood didn't speak, didn't breathe right. His jaw clenched so tight it felt welded shut, his knuckles bone white around the Glock, useless now. He just stared into the trees where Max had disappeared, where the silence had fallen, where hope had gone to die. "Elwood," Nora's voice cracked behind him. Gentle, breaking. He didn't answer. "We have to move." Still, nothing. "Elwood, please. The pups. They're shivering." She didn't say it out loud, but he heard what she meant beneath the words. "If he gave his life for us, don't let it be in vain." Elwood turned slow, mechanical like a puppet with waterlogged strings. His boots sunk into the mud as he knelt beside the hollow, gently scooping up two of the pups and cradling them against his chest like they were made of breath and ash. The others whined softly, nudging closer. He looked at Nora. She was soaked, shaking, eyes rimmed red but steady. Steady like women who've buried wars in their own backyards. She gathered the remaining pups into the makeshift sling of her coat and nodded once. No more tears now. No time. They began to move. The woods were unkind. Roots clawed at their boots, the wet earth pulling at each step like it wanted to drag them back down into the grave Max had bought them out of. Elwood led the way. His body ached, a deep throb in his hip, in his spine, but none of it louder than the voice repeating in his head, "Not him too, not him too." He had lost men in the jungle who never made it home. Lost his wife in a roadside blast she wasn't meant to be near. And now Max, that damned dog who came with leaves in his mouth and eyes that remembered things no animal should. The one who never barked for food, only for truth. A branch snapped behind them. Both froze. Elwood raised the pistol, shoulders tight. Nothing, just wind, just rain. They moved again. The trail curved left, climbing toward the old fence line that marked the outer edge of what used to be the Henderson property. Beyond it, fields, a gravel road, maybe even a cell signal. "Not far now," he muttered, more to the pups than to Nora. But the smallest one scout, the runt, gave a soft, pitiful whimper, burrowing deeper into the crook of his arm like it could sense the grief pressing down on him. Elwood stumbled, fell to one knee, and for a heartbeat he stayed there, drenched, exhausted, cradling a life that wasn't his, whispering to ghosts he didn't believe in. "Why is it always the best ones?" he said, teeth grinding. "Why is it always the damn dogs?" A sliver of light caught his eye, dim, distant. The edge of the woods. He rose. He didn't want to, but he did. Because someone had to carry what Max left behind. Because the rain was still falling. And someone had to run for the light. Nora reached the fence first, panting, clutching the pups against her chest. Her coat was soaked through, her hair clinging to her face like threads of mourning. "Elwood, you with me?" He didn't answer. But he was. Right behind her. He handed her the runt, lifted the others one by one over the fence, then hauled himself up and over with a grunt that tore through the pain. They tumbled down the other side, into the overgrown grass and gravel. For a second, there was nothing but the sound of rain on metal and old road sign they didn't stop to read. And then headlights, faint, approaching. Elwood stood in the middle of the road, mud dripping from his chin, eyes burning. He didn't wave, just stared the lights down like they owed him something, because they did. As the truck slowed, Nora called out, waving with her free hand. The driver rolled the window down, startled by the sight of the two soaked figures and a bundle of whimpering pups in their arms. "You folks all right?" Elwood didn't answer at first, just looked back once, into the dark, into the trees, and whispered so quiet it was almost lost to the rain. "You better be alive, you stubborn bastard." Then he climbed into the truck, the runt still tucked against his heart, and didn't look back again. The road ahead curved like a question mark swallowed by mist. The truck's engine hummed steady, tires sloshing through shallow puddles as the driver, some kind soul from town Elwood didn't know by name, spoke softly to Nora, asking where the nearest vet was, what had happened, whether they needed police. Elwood didn't respond. He sat in the back seat, soaked to the bone, arms wrapped around the pups, his eyes fixed on the rear window like he was still chasing something through the trees. Something or someone who hadn't come back. Not yet. Then he heard it. At first, just a thud, a shuffle. The driver tapped the brakes, confused. Then, a shape staggered from the tree line, limping, bloodied. Elwood slammed his fist against the glass. "Stop!" The truck skidded to a halt. He threw the door open before it fully stopped moving, boots hitting gravel with a crunch, sprinting into the headlight's beam. And there, collapsing onto the road like the storm itself had spat him out, Max, soaked, wounded, barely standing, but alive. The scream tore out of Elwood like something from years buried. "Max!" He reached him in 3 strides, dropping to his knees, arms out, catching the dog before he crumpled fully. Max whined, a low, broken sound, and tried to lick Elwood's face, but his jaw quivered too much to hold the motion. There was blood on his side, a lot of it, and more trailing behind like breadcrumbs through the rain. "You stupid, magnificent bastard," Elwood whispered, voice cracking. He ran his hands along the dog's ribs, feeling the jagged warmth of torn skin and muscle. 1 round, maybe 2, but nothing fatal. Not yet. Max tried to sit up, but Elwood pressed him gently down. "Easy, you're okay. I've got you now." Then, tires on gravel, another vehicle, but not friendly. 2 headlights emerged behind them from the bend fast, too fast. Elwood rose, shielding Max with his body. The other truck didn't slow. "Gun!" Nora shouted from behind, voice shrill with panic, and from the bed of that pickup, a barrel appeared. But before the shot could fire, red and blue strobes exploded into the night from the opposite end of the road. "Sheriff's office, drop your weapon." The cruiser's spotlight flared to life, blinding. Sirens howled through the trees. The men in the pickup hesitated. A beat. Then they turned the wheel sharp and sped off, tires kicking up mud, fish-tailing as they disappeared into the woods. Sheriff Donovan's vehicle skidded into place, blocking pursuit. 2 deputies leapt out, guns drawn. "Get on the ground!" one shouted, not yet sure who was who. Nora raised her hands. Elwood stayed crouched, arms still around Max. "He's mine," he growled, "and he's hurt bad." Sheriff Donovan stepped forward, soaked hat dripping, eyes scanning the scene. His voice dropped as he recognized the dog. "Is that—" Elwood nodded. "Yeah, that's the one they call Leaf Dog, but his real name's Max." The sheriff's jaw tightened. Jesus. Then to the deputy, "Call in backup. We've got bastards in the woods and this ain't over." Paramedics were on the way. Nora held the pups close in the warmth of the idling truck, tears cutting trails through the grime on her cheeks. Elwood didn't move. He stayed with Max, one hand on the dog's chest, feeling the rise and fall, still breathing, still here, still fighting. And for the first time in a long time, under the red and blue glow of justice finally catching up to evil, Elwood whispered something not to Max, but to the sky. "You didn't take him." And the rain kept falling. But this time, it felt like mercy. The fluorescent lights of the small-town animal clinic buzzed softly, casting a sterile glow across linoleum floors and rows of old magazines. The building smelled of antiseptic, wet fur, and something older like time worn thin by too many prayers and not enough answers. Elwood sat in the far corner of the waiting room, hands clasped, head down. He hadn't prayed since Kandahar. Not really. But tonight, something broke. Something old and rusted open. "Please," he whispered, barely audible. "Please, don't let that dog die." Behind the swinging double doors, Max was in the hands of Dr. Sarah Reynolds, the town vet for over 20 years, her silver braid tucked into her coat collar, hands steady as stone. "Through and through," she muttered to her assistant. "Clean entry, bad exit. This dog's been lucky, and hell-bent on surviving." Blood soaked the towel beneath Max, but the breathing, though ragged, held rhythm. Shrapnel wounds, bruised ribs, signs of old trauma. She'd seen it before. Not just in animals. No, the soldiers brought it in with them, too. "You're not just a stray, are you?" she whispered to the unconscious German shepherd. "You've seen things." Max didn't move, but the twitch of his paw against the oxygen tube felt like a silent nod. In the next room, Nora crouched beside a heated kennel, gently brushing straw from the backs of 6 German shepherd pups. Most were trembling, but alert, lapping warm milk from tiny syringes. Except the runt. He lay curled against her palm, barely breathing. "I think this one's going," the vet tech said gently. "No," Nora whispered. "He's just tired. They're all tired." She cupped the pup closer to her chest, letting it feel her heartbeat. A human rhythm, steady, soft, alive. In the hallway, a deputy passed Elwood a styrofoam cup of coffee. It went untouched. Time folded in on itself. Minutes blurred. The thunder outside rolled on like the last groan of something ancient dying in the distance. And still, Elwood sat, hands trembling slightly, lips moving in silence. It wasn't just Max he was praying for. It was everything. The guilt, the ghosts, the chance to believe again that not everything good had to end in blood and loss. Then the door swung open. Dr. Reynolds stood in the frame, her coat stained, hair clinging to her temple. She looked tired, but she was smiling. "He's gonna make it," she said simply. No ceremony, just truth. Elwood didn't stand. He couldn't. He only exhaled, a breath he'd been holding for years. In the next room, a squeak emerged, a sound like air being pulled from something too small to contain it. The runt stirred. Tiny paws twitched. Nora gasped. He moved. Elwood pressed his palm to the cool surface of the kennel glass, where Max now lay stitched and bandaged, eyes fluttering under sedation. "You stubborn son of a gun," he whispered. "You weren't done yet, were you?" Outside, the rain began to ease. Not fully, just enough for Hope to step through the door. The door chimed softly. It was just after dawn, the clinic soaked in pale gold light, dew still clinging to the windows. The storm had passed, leaving the town washed and eerily still, as if the earth itself had taken a breath it hadn't dared draw in years. Elwood looked up from the worn chair he hadn't left all night. Boots, regulation cut, pressed uniform, an insignia glinting in the morning sun. U.S. Army. The man walked with the bearing of someone who'd memorized corridors of command and consequence. But in his eyes, there was something else. Something hollowed. Familiar. "Captain James Weller," he said, offering his ID to the receptionist, then nodding toward the hallway. "I'm here for the dog. We believe he's—" "Sergeant Ash." Dr. Reynolds led him to the recovery room. Max— No. Ash lay curled beneath a heat lamp, bandages clean but visible. One ear flicked. He didn't stir until the captain knelt, removed his hat, and in a voice that barely held together he called, "Sergeant Ash!" The German shepherd blinked. Slowly. Recognition bloomed behind those amber eyes like sunlight through smoke. Then Ash lifted his head, just slightly, and thumped his tail. Elwood watched from the hallway, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Something sharp tugged behind his ribs. Pride, pain, and something he couldn't name. Captain Weller turned. "We lost him a year ago in Kandahar. Convoy hit an IED. Thought he'd perished with the rest. But no body was found." He stepped closer to the glass. "We tried to track reports. Someone said a wounded dog was seen near the border. But after that, nothing. It's like he vanished." Dr. Reynolds tilted her head. "Until he walked into a dying town with a bloodied leaf in his mouth." Weller nodded. "He was one of the best. 5 tours, 3 confirmed life saves, and a loyalty that scared some of the men more than the enemy ever did." He looked at Elwood then. "You're the one who found him?" Elwood didn't answer. Not with words. He just stepped forward and pressed his hand to the glass. Inside, Ash turned. And despite the fatigue, the pain, the history, he stood, wobbly, deliberate, proud, like a soldier who recognized his new command. Later, as the sun broke fully across the hills, Elwood sat alone outside, rubbing the ridge of his scarred palm. Nora joined him, a paper cup in one hand, a sleeping pup in the other. "You ever think," she said gently, "maybe he didn't come back for them?" Elwood didn't look at her. "Maybe," she continued, "he came back for you." He said nothing. But in his silence, something softened. And when Ash limped out behind the screen door, dragging his IV stand like a medal of war, and sat beside him, Elwood didn't move away. He just whispered, "Welcome home, Sergeant." The world didn't shift with a bang. It returned in whispers, a dog's breath against tile, the soft hum of fluorescent lights. A sunrise sliding through clinic blinds like the first apology of a long-forgotten god. Elwood opened his eyes, not with alarm, not with dread, but with something unfamiliar. Peace. He hadn't known the weight he'd been carrying until it wasn't crushing his chest. Across from him, Scout, the runt of the litter, lay in a makeshift incubator, a knitted sock pulled over his body like a tiny sweater. His breathing was slow, steady, fragile, but undeniably there. Elwood sat up, shoulders creaking like old floorboards. Max, no. Ash was beside the kennel now, no longer on a stretcher. Still bandaged, still limping, but awake, watching, guarding. The same way Elwood once had from a forward operating base, rifle across his lap, waiting for the night to decide if it would take someone he loved. Dr. Reynolds walked in, coffee in hand, her voice quiet. He made it. Both of them did. Elwood blinked. Scout? She smiled. That's what Nora named him, isn't it? Elwood looked over at Nora, asleep in the corner with two other pups bundled against her chest. Her hand rested on the third, a soft reflex even in sleep. Like mothers do. She said it means little brave one, the vet added. Fitting. Outside, the town began to stir. Shutters opened. Radios clicked on. Conversations, cautious at first, began to include the phrase, "That old war dog," and Elwood Harper of all people, and something about a busted-up German shepherd and a litter of pups. Change rarely announced itself. It seeped, like morning through the edges of blackout curtains. Elwood rose slowly, walking toward the glass where Ash now stood. For the first time, he reached out and opened the latch. The dog didn't hesitate. He stepped out like he had always belonged on this side of the door. Elwood knelt, and Ash lowered his head, pressing his scarred muzzle into the space between Elwood's shoulder and neck. A soldier's embrace. No medals, no orders. Just a homecoming. Scout gave a weak whimper, and Ash turned nose brushing against the incubator, tail twitching. Elwood followed. The pup blinked, tiny body rising with the effort. Elwood chuckled, rough and quiet. "You're gonna be a handful, aren't you?" Ash looked up at him. The eyes said it all. Yes, but worth it. And somewhere in the room, something lifted. Elwood didn't know if it was the guilt, the years of silence, or the wall around his heart, but it cracked, and the morning rushed in. They came at dawn, not with barking dogs or battering rams, but with black SUVs, government windbreakers, and the kind of silence that tells you the storm has already passed, and now justice is sweeping up the wreckage. Carver's cabin was sealed off within the hour. The shed, the one with the rusted door and soaked straw, became federal evidence. The names etched in notebooks, the vials in coolers, DNA records, photos of litters that had never survived long enough to see the sun. Carver was found in a cheap motel 2 towns over. No guards, no escape plan, just a man who had underestimated how loud truth could get when a town like theirs, silent for so long, finally chose to speak. Nora Bell stood under the courthouse steps 3 days later. A microphone was shoved too close, the backdrop cluttered with reporters hungry for headlines. But she didn't blink. Her voice, though hoarse, carried. They weren't just dogs. They were soldiers, survivors, children in fur. She held up a photo one she printed herself at the library. 6 German shepherd pups. Ash sitting behind them, eyes proud, body bandaged. This one, she tapped Scout's head, wasn't expected to make it, but he did. And the man who helped him? He didn't want to be here today, Because people like Elwood Harper don't chase credit. They bury friends and carry ghosts. The clip went viral. Across the country, people cried over black and tan faces. Rescue applications surged. Politicians promised sweeping reforms for military canine retirement programs. Elwood didn't watch a single interview. At the back of the hardware store, under a shelf of old nails and hurricane tarps, sat a single envelope, unmarked. Inside, $50,000, the full federal reward for reporting the illegal breeding ring. Dr. Reynolds found it taped to her clinic door, a note tucked beneath, for the ones who never got out, for the ones who still might. E.H. Sheriff Donovan tried to shake his hand when they crossed paths in the feed store. Elwood just nodded. That was enough. The town knew now. The scars on Ash's body. The faded patch that used to bear a rank. The reason he'd shown up with bloodied leaves and the quiet discipline of someone who had seen war and chosen mercy anyway. At night, Elwood sat on the porch, Ash beside him. Scout curled between them like a question mark, waiting for the world to make sense. Elwood sipped his coffee, watched the stars, listened to the crickets and the occasional rustle from Nora's backyard. He didn't need the spotlight. He didn't want it. He'd found something better, a reason. A year can pass quietly in a town like Shallow Creek. No sirens, no parades, just the slow rhythm of people trying to be better than they were the year before. But if you stood in front of Harper's General Goods on the anniversary of the raid, right as the sun broke over the hills, you'd see it. The open windows, the new coat of paint. A weathered sign above the door, still hand-lettered, but now lovingly restored. Harper and Bell Supplies and Feed. Inside, fresh cedar shelves lined with bags of grain and jars of local honey. A bulletin board filled with pictures. Kids hugging pups in hospital gowns, soldiers laughing with their arms around canines, elderly couples sitting beside shepherds with seeing-eye harnesses. And in the center of it all, behind the counter like he'd never left, was Elwood Harper. He moved slower now. The limp was more noticeable on rainy days, but his eyes, once clouded with detachment, held something new. Light. Max lay on the mat near the counter. His muzzle had gone grayer, and the fur where the bullet had torn through him never quite grew back right. But he was alive, retired, with full honors. A plaque from the Department of Defense hung just above the register, engraved Sergeant Ash, combat veteran, hero, survivor. When children entered the store, they were always quiet at first, unsure of the large dog's presence. But Max had a way of tilting his head just enough. Calm, curious, kind, like saying, "You're safe here. I've seen worse. You'll be okay." Scout was a different story. Now, fully grown, he had taken to following Nora like a shadow. She called him her lie detector, often joking that if Scout didn't like you, neither would she. He'd passed every therapy dog certification, twice. One Tuesday, Elwood watched him walk into the local high school with a counselor there to support kids who had lost parents during deployment. One boy in particular wouldn't speak, wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, until Scout lay his head in the boy's lap and didn't move. The boy whispered one word: safe. 3 of the pups had gone on to K-9 duty too with the state police, one with a fire and rescue unit in Colorado. The 4th, a female named Moxie, had joined a search and rescue team out of Nashville. She'd already found 3 missing hikers and was being profiled in a regional magazine. They were never meant to be bred for violence, Dr. Reynolds had said during an interview. They were built for loyalty, for love. That evening, as the sun slid behind the trees, Elwood locked the door to the store. Max stood slowly, stretching. Scout waited at the curb. Elwood reached into his pocket and pulled out a single leaf maple, slightly dried, edges curled. He bent down and placed it on the porch rail. No reason, no audience, just memory. He turned to his dogs. "Ready?" Max gave a soft grunt. Scout barked once, then fell into step, and together they walked down the main street, 3 survivors, not just alive, but reborn. The porch had always been a threshold for Elwood Harper, between silence and sound, between past and present, between the world he used to know and the one he never thought he'd be part of again. Now it was just a porch, faded paint, a creaky swing, and a view of a quiet street where life's slow, honest life kept happening. Scout bounded across the front yard, a tangle of paws and enthusiasm. The puppy was no longer tiny, but still carried that unshakable runt energy, eager to please, quicker to trust than most dogs would be after what he'd been through. A boy from 2 doors down, maybe 6 or 7, giggled wildly as Scout circled him, then dropped into a playful crouch. The boy tossed a stick clumsily too short, too crooked, and Scout bolted like it was gold. Elwood sat on the porch steps, a chipped mug of black coffee in hand, untouched. Not because it was too hot, but because his attention was somewhere else. He smiled, not a smirk, not a polite twitch of the mouth. A real, quiet smile. It startled even him, that feeling, like something soft opening in a chest, long boarded shut. He'd told himself once, long ago, that he didn't have the bandwidth for joy anymore, that war took things you didn't even know had names, that love or hope or forgiveness were luxuries left behind with dog tags and folded flags. But now here he was, watching a dog he'd once thought was just a stray, playing with a kid who had no idea what Scout had survived. No one did, really. They just saw a happy pup and a laughing child. And maybe that was enough. The wind picked up gently, rustling the porch chimes. Elwood closed his eyes for a second. He remembered Iraq. He remembered the sound of helicopters, the smell of diesel and fear. He remembered standing beside a coffin that should have never been closed so soon. He remembered Max Sergeant Ash, stepping through the storm with blood on his muzzle and eyes that said, "We're not done yet." Scout returned with the stick, dropped it at the boy's feet, then, almost as an afterthought, trotted up the steps and pressed his warm head into Elwood's knee. Elwood looked down. "Go on," he murmured. "Kid's waiting," Scout barked once, cheerful, and bounded back down. From across the street, Nora watched from her own porch, sipping lemonade, her garden apron still dusted with soil. She didn't wave, didn't call out, just nodded, like she saw something she'd always hoped would grow back, finally taking root. The porch creaked again as Elwood stood. He didn't feel old. He didn't feel broken, just present. He took a sip of his coffee, lukewarm now, and whispered, almost to himself, "Not a bad way to start the day." The banner fluttered in the wind, taut and white against a sky too wide to hold the weight of what was about to be said. Sergeant Daniel Reyes Memorial Canine Training Center. The letters crisp, sharp, stitched in memory. Rows of folding chairs filled the sunlit clearing, set up just past the edge of town where an old lumber yard used to be. Now it smelled of fresh concrete, cut wood, and something deeper, purpose. Ash sat in the front row beside Elwood, his silver muzzle resting gently on one paw. The scar behind his left ear-long faded, glinted in the sun like a badge no one could take from him. Nearby, the 6 German shepherd pups, no longer pups, now sat with their handlers. One was part of the sheriff's new K9 unit, another wore a search and rescue vest. The runt scout wore nothing, just a calm gaze and a tail that thumped twice when Elwood looked his way. The mayor finished speaking. And with this center, we don't just train dogs. We honor the bond, the trust, the sacrifices made in silence. Today, that bond has a home. Applause, then silence again, because it was Elwood's turn. He moved slowly toward the podium, not out of pain but out of gravity. This wasn't the kind of stage he'd ever imagined standing on. He'd been the man who sold canned beans in a dusty store, the man who buried his past beneath paperbacks and cigarette smoke, the man who couldn't even say his wife's name aloud for 5 years. Now, he faced a crowd, and Ash sat behind him, watching, waiting. "I wasn't supposed to be here today," Elwood said, voice raspy, unpolished. "If you'd asked me last year, I wouldn't have come, wouldn't have said a word, would have told you I didn't have anything left worth sharing." He glanced down. His hand trembled slightly. He gripped the edges of the podium. "But a dog brought me a leaf." A few soft chuckles. Nora nodded from the second row, eyes already misting. Not a message, not a bark, just a leaf. Then another, the next day, and the next. And every morning, that same dog showed up. Not asking for anything, just waiting. Like he knew I needed to remember something I'd tried to forget. He paused. The breeze picked up. That dog was Ash, a war hero, a survivor. But more than that, he was proof. Proof that even the broken still carry purpose. That loyalty doesn't vanish with orders. That love, real, quiet, patient love finds a way back, even if it has to crawl through storms to get there. Silence. And then, this center. It's not just for training K9s, it's for people like me. People who need reminding that sometimes redemption shows up with muddy paws and a leaf in its mouth. Applause broke gently. No roar, just the kind that says, "We see you." Elwood stepped back. Ash stood up, walked to him without command, and sat at his side. The captain, who had identified Ash months ago, approached with a polished box. He opened it. Inside, a silver badge engraved with Sergeant Daniel Reyes, and beside it, a new tag, K9 Ash, retired with honors. Elwood didn't speak. He just reached down, clipped the tag onto Ash's collar, and whispered, "You carried him with you. Now we carry you both." The wind stirred the banner again. And from that day on, the first leaf that fell each autumn was framed inside the welcome hall beneath the words, "Some stories begin with war. Ours began with a leaf." The sun filtered through the dusty windows of Elwood's store, painting long golden rectangles across the worn wooden floor. Outside, wind chimes jingled softly, barely audible above the rustle of leaves drifting down from the sycamore that had grown taller than the awning itself. Inside, things had changed. The back shelves, once cluttered with expired soup cans and dusty fishing tackle, now held rows of neatly labeled jars, homemade pickles, preserves, and treats for dogs. The corner that used to house a creaky old mini-fridge now had a community bulletin board, handwritten notes about puppies up for adoption, lost pets, and one torn flyer announcing the next, Veterans and K9 BBQ. But what hadn't changed was the counter. Same wood, same crack on the left corner where someone once dropped a box of nails. Same little bell on top. And behind it, like a secret only the room knew, stood a small glass case. Inside that case was a single dried leaf curled slightly, edges brown. Next to it, a medal. The inscription on the plate read, Kai, Sergeant Ash, for valor beyond command, one leaf at a time. Elwood sat in his chair by the register, shoulders easier than they'd been in years. His army jacket hung on a hook behind him, faded but clean. His hands, once clenched so tightly in sleep that they trembled at dawn, now rested calmly on the arms of his chair. Max Ash lay at his feet. The dog was older now, his muzzle a little grayer, his walk a little slower. But those eyes? They hadn't aged a day. Still sharp, still sure. Still that quiet fire, steady even when the rest of the world shook. Elwood looked down at him. "You saved me too," he whispered. Max didn't move for a moment, just blinked. Then slowly his head lifted. Eyes met eyes. No words, no sounds, just that look. The same look he had given Elwood that night in the rain. The same look in the woods by the cabin. The same look he had carried through hell and back. Max's tail thumped once against the floor. Not loud, not urgent, just enough. The bell above the door rang. A kid from the neighborhood peeked in. "Hey, Mr. E, you got those sweet potato chews Scout likes?" Elwood stood slowly, smiling. "Aisle 2, top shelf." As the door shut behind the boy, Max rested his head back on his paws. Elwood turned back to the counter. His fingers grazed the edge of the display case where a leaf had once landed, carried by a ghost with 4 legs and too many scars. Outside, another breeze danced through the sycamore, and a new leaf fluttered to the doorstep. In a world that often forgets its wounded, whether soldier or stray stories like Max's, remind us that healing doesn't always come wrapped in words. Sometimes it comes in silence, in a loyal gaze, in a leaf left at a doorstep. German shepherds like Max aren't just dogs. They're protectors, partners, and in many ways the last honest hearts in a fractured world. Their bravery is silent, their loyalty is absolute, and their capacity to forgive, to try again, love again, trust again, is something we all could learn from. This story isn't just about a retired war dog or an old man finding purpose again. It's about how second chances show up in unlikely forms, and how, if we're willing to listen, love has a way of returning home. So if you've ever believed that one soul, be it man or animal, can change a life, hold on to that belief. Nurture it. Share it. Because somewhere out there, a dog is waiting, not for food, not for shelter, but for someone to see him. And maybe, just maybe, that someone is you. If this story touched your heart, leave a heart in the comments and tell us, who was your Max? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.